The Byzantine Empire of the late 7th century was a realm torn by wars, religious disputes and shifting alliances. In this turbulent setting rose Justinian II, a man who would become both feared and despised, remembered not only for his rule, but for the brutal punishments he inflicted. His reign was a reflection of ambition mixed with cruelty, driving subjects to both awe and revolt. Born in 668 CE, Justinian II was the son of Emperor Constantine IV. From childhood he was steeped in imperial politics and groomed for the throne. The empire he inherited was a shrinking giant, battered by Arab invasions in the east and Slavic incursions in the Balkans. The young emperor quickly showed he would rule with iron will, and where diplomacy faltered, punishment became his instrument of control. When Justinian II ascended the throne in 685, he sought to restore Byzantine glory. At first, his military campaigns against the Arabs were successful, securing a treaty that brought tribute to Constantinople. Yet victories abroad did little to soothe the unrest within his empire. The Byzantine aristocracy, weary of burdensome taxes and Justinian's growing suspicion, soon came to fear the man meant to protect them. Justinian's obsession with absolute authority revealed itself in his treatment of opposition. Rebellions in the Balkans and Anatolia were crushed without mercy. Prisoners of war and rebels alike often faced gruesome punishments designed not only to eliminate threats, but to serve as warnings. Executions were made public spectacles, and mutilation became one of his favored methods. In Byzantine law, mutilation carried a symbolic weight. A man disfigured, especially by losing his nose, ears, or tongue, was marked as unfit to rule or command. Justinian wielded this practice ruthlessly. Enemies who might challenge his throne were paraded before the people with noses slit open, faces forever scarred. To the emperor, this was justice. To his subjects, it was terror. The hippodrome of Constantinople, usually filled with cheering crowds for chariot races, often became a stage for humiliation. Captured generals and nobles accused of betrayal were brought before the masses. Instead of swift execution, their noses were hacked off, their ears sliced away, or their tongues torn from their mouths. These brutal acts served both as punishment and entertainment for those who dared watch. Justinian's cruelty extended even to the aristocracy of Constantinople. Senators accused of disloyalty found themselves dragged from their villas and subjected to mutilation. A noble stripped of his dignity could no longer pose a political threat, for disfigurement barred him from imperial service. Thus, the emperor maintained his grip not through loyalty, but through fear etched into flesh. Even church officials were not spared from Justinian's wrath. The emperor's heavy hand in religious disputes led to clashes with patriarchs and bishops. Those who resisted his decrees sometimes faced blinding or mutilation, ensuring their voices would never again challenge imperial authority. This blending of politics and cruelty fractured the unity of faith and throne. To his enemies, Justinian became known as Rhinotmetos, the slitter of noses. His reign was haunted by the sight of mutilated faces roaming Constantinople, reminders of what happened to those who opposed imperial command. Fear filled the air, for any whisper of dissent could lead to one's body being disfigured and one's honor forever destroyed. Taxation became another weapon of control. To fund his military campaigns and lavish building projects, Justinian raised taxes to unbearable levels. When cities resisted payment, their leaders were punished with nose-slitting or tongue-cutting. The empire's treasury swelled, but resentment brewed in the hearts of citizens who saw their emperor less as a protector and more as a tyrant. His cruelty was matched only by his arrogance. Justinian believed himself chosen by God, destined to restore the greatness of Byzantium no matter the cost. The mutilations were not acts of madness in his eyes, but divine justice against those who betrayed the order of heaven. To his court, however, this conviction bred fear of a ruler untethered by compassion. The emperor's most notorious acts of brutality followed military failures. When campaigns in the Balkans faltered, Justinian turned his anger inward. Generals accused of cowardice were not executed, but disfigured, their mutilated bodies paraded before soldiers as examples of disgrace. The practice spread fear among commanders, but it also eroded their loyalty, for none wished to serve under a ruler who punished failure with mutilation. Among the people, stories of the emperor's punishment spread like wildfire. Mothers warned their children that disobedience might earn them the fate of a slit nose. Merchants whispered of nobles dragged through the streets, faces bloody and torn. The empire lived beneath the shadow of their emperor's cruelty, each punishment reinforcing the image of a ruler more feared than loved. Despite his cruelty, Justinian II pursued grand visions for Constantinople. He commissioned new churches and palaces, gilded in gold and marble, symbols of imperial majesty. Yet even these monuments could not erase the terror that lingered in the streets. For each dome that rose into the sky, there were mutilated bodies in the alleys, reminders of the price of defiance. The aristocracy, once loyal out of necessity, began to plot in secret. Their wealth could no longer shield them from Justinian's wrath. One misstep, one accusation of disloyalty could lead to mutilation. As fear hardened into hatred, conspiracies against the emperor multiplied. The seeds of betrayal were sown not by foreign enemies, but by his own subjects, driven to desperation by his cruelty. Even in foreign diplomacy, Justinian's brutality was known. Envoys from rival powers recounted tales of mutilated nobles and generals. For some, this inspired fear, convincing them not to test the wrath of Byzantium. For others, it revealed the empire's fragility, for a ruler who ruled by mutilation risked turning his own people into enemies. The empire under Justinian II became a paradox. Victories abroad expanded its power, yet at home cruelty hollowed its foundations. The emperor's reliance on mutilation as a tool of governance made him both formidable and fragile. Each nose cut, each tongue torn, each face ruined brought him closer to rebellion. By the final years of his first reign, discontent reached its peak. The mutilated faces that wandered Constantinople were no longer warnings but symbols of tyranny. The people whispered of overthrow, and the aristocracy prepared for revolt. Justinian's cruelty, once his weapon of control, had sown the very seeds of his downfall. In 695 CE, rebellion broke out in Constantinople. The people and nobles rose against the emperor they feared but no longer respected. As the uprising swept through the capital, Justinian found himself trapped by the very terror he had created. Soon, the emperor who had mutilated so many would face mutilation himself. The year was 695 CE, and Constantinople burned with fury. The streets filled with angry citizens, soldiers, and nobles, each shouting for the fall of Justinian II. Years of cruelty and excessive taxes had finally pushed the empire to rebellion. The city that once feared its emperor now demanded his blood. At the center of the uprising stood Leontios, a respected general who had suffered under Justinian's suspicious rule. Leontios rallied soldiers and senators alike, promising freedom from tyranny. His name spread like fire among the people, and soon the gates of the palace trembled under the weight of revolt. Justinian, desperate, sought to cling to power. He tried to summon loyal troops, but many had turned against him. Those who once trembled at his punishments now saw their chance for vengeance. For every noble he had mutilated, there were families eager to strike back at the emperor. The mob stormed the palace with ferocity. Doors were broken, halls echoed with the crash of steel, and imperial guards were cut down. Justinian was seized, his imperial robes torn away. The once mighty ruler was dragged through the streets of Constantinople, surrounded by jeers and curses from the very people who had once bowed before him. In Byzantine tradition, an emperor could not simply be executed. Instead, mutilation was the chosen path, ensuring that the dethroned monarch could never rule again. Justinian himself had used this punishment to cripple rivals, and now fate turned the blade upon him. The people demanded humiliation, not just deposition. The man who had slit the noses of others would now have his own face marked forever. In the Hippodrome, the great arena where he had once displayed mutilated captives, Justinian was forced to kneel before the crowd. Torches flickered in the night, and the air was thick with hatred. A soldier stepped forward with a sharp blade. Without ceremony, Justinian's nose was slit deep and brutally cut away. Blood poured down his face as the crowd roared in savage triumph. The punishment was both symbolic and practical. Disfigurement stripped him of dignity and the possibility of reclaiming the throne. The mutilation did not end with the knife. His enemies ensured the wound was jagged and severe, leaving him grotesque and scarred. The people laughed at the sight of their fallen ruler, no longer the iron-fisted emperor, but a broken man, his face destroyed by the same cruelty he had inflicted upon others. This act earned him a new name, Rhinotmetos, the Slit-Nosed. The title became both his curse and his identity, a permanent reminder of his fall. Wherever he went, his mutilated face told the story of an emperor humbled and disgraced. After his mutilation, Justinian was not executed. Instead, he was paraded through Constantinople as a living symbol of punishment. The crowd hurled stones, spat upon him, and mocked his cries of pain. To many, it was divine justice. God himself had struck down a tyrant through the hands of the people. Stripped of his crown, Justinian was exiled. He was sent across the sea to Cherson, a distant city on the Crimean peninsula. There, the once mighty emperor lived in humiliation, a ruler turned outcast. The golden halls of Constantinople were replaced by cold winds and unfamiliar faces. Life in exile was harsh. Justinian's scarred face marked him instantly, a reminder of his fall from power. Merchants avoided him, children pointed at him, and even in foreign lands, whispers of Rhinotmetos followed. For a man who once considered himself chosen by God, the humiliation was unbearable. Yet Justinian was not a man to fade quietly. Even in exile, his ambition burned. He plotted day and night, seeking allies who might restore him to the throne. Though mutilated, his will remained unbroken, and he dreamed of revenge against those who had dared to mar his body and steal his empire. The Byzantine Empire, meanwhile, settled under new rule. Leontios took the throne, promising a reign of stability. But his power rested on the same fragile foundations: ambitious generals, restless nobles, and a people easily swayed. Constantinople celebrated Justinian's downfall, yet the scars of his cruelty still lingered in every corner of the city. While Justinian suffered in exile, his mutilation became a tale repeated throughout the empire. Parents told their children how the slit-nosed tyrant had fallen, a warning that no ruler, no matter how powerful, could escape justice. Yet to others, the story was less about justice and more about survival. Politics in Byzantium was a bloody game, and mutilation was the price of losing. In Cherson, Justinian tried to rebuild his influence. He sent secret letters, bribed local leaders, and sought support from tribes beyond Byzantine borders. His face may have been scarred, but his ambition was not. Each night, he touched the wound where his nose had been, vowing to reclaim both his empire and his vengeance. The mutilated emperor soon found allies among the Khazars, a powerful people north of the Black Sea. Their ruler, the Khagan, welcomed Justinian and even offered him marriage to his sister. With this new alliance, Justinian gained protection and resources, building the foundation for his eventual return. But Constantinople was not blind to his schemes. Word spread that the slit-nosed emperor was gathering strength, and Leontios grew uneasy. Spies were sent to watch him, and whispers of assassination attempts followed Justinian in exile. The empire feared not only his ambition, but the possibility that a mutilated man might yet reclaim the throne. Despite the disfigurement meant to end his career, Justinian refused to yield. He wore a golden prosthetic nose, a grotesque mask that hid his mutilation. With this, he attempted to restore the image of authority, presenting himself not as a broken exile, but as a ruler awaiting his return. His enemies mocked the sight of the emperor with a false nose, calling him a phantom of the throne. Yet beneath the ridicule lay unease. A man who had survived mutilation and exile, still plotting revenge, was a dangerous enemy indeed. The people of Constantinople remembered their laughter on the day of his downfall, but whispers began to grow. What if Justinian returned? What if the slit-nosed emperor, scarred but unbroken, marched once more into the city he had ruled with terror? The thought unsettled both nobles and generals, for Byzantium was never free of intrigue. In the bitter winds of exile, Justinian's fury only grew stronger. Each scar upon his face was a reminder not of defeat, but of unfinished destiny. The mutilated ruler bided his time, waiting for the moment when Constantinople would tremble once more at the name of Justinian II. Years passed, but Justinian's rage never cooled. In exile, the mutilated emperor turned his wound into a weapon, transforming humiliation into determination. The golden prosthetic nose he wore became not a mark of shame, but a symbol of his defiance against those who thought him finished. With the Khazars at his side, Justinian gained protection and influence. Yet treachery haunted him even in this new alliance. Leontios, fearing his return, bribed Khazar officials to plot his death. But Justinian uncovered the scheme and struck first, strangling his betrayers and fleeing once again. His exile became a journey of vengeance. Seeking new allies, he turned to the Bulgars. Their powerful ruler, Khan Tervel, found in Justinian both a desperate ally and a useful tool. With promises of wealth and land, Justinian secured the Bulgar army, setting his sights on Constantinople. The slit-nosed emperor would return not as a beggar but as a conqueror. In 705 CE, Justinian and his Bulgar allies approached the walls of Constantinople. The city's defenders mocked him, believing a mutilated man could never rule again. But Justinian knew the weaknesses of the capital, for he had once been its master. By night, with a small band of men, he slipped through an old aqueduct tunnel beneath the walls. The city awoke to chaos. Soldiers loyal to Justinian seized control of gates and towers. The Bulgar army stormed in behind them, their war cries echoing through the streets. Constantinople, once the stage of his humiliation, now fell back into his hands. The slit-nosed emperor had returned, and vengeance burned in his eyes. The people were stunned. The same crowd that had once jeered at his mutilation now saw Justinian restored to power. His golden nose glittered beneath the sun as he marched into the hippodrome, the very place where he had been disgraced. To his enemies, it was not only a return but a reckoning. Justinian's vengeance was swift and merciless. Leontios, the man who had deposed him, was dragged before him. The emperor ordered his old rival's nose slit in the same fashion before casting him into chains. Then, to seal his fury, he had Leontios paraded through the streets as he himself once had been. But Justinian's wrath did not stop there. Tiberius, the general who had later replaced Leontios, also fell into his hands. Both were executed, their mutilated bodies displayed to the people as warnings. The slit-nosed emperor had returned not to forgive, but to repay cruelty with cruelty. For a time, fear reigned once again in Constantinople. Justinian's punishments grew harsher, his paranoia sharper. Anyone suspected of plotting against him faced mutilation or death. Faces were scarred, tongues torn, and ears severed. The emperor who had survived humiliation now ruled with vengeance, determined never to be overthrown again. Yet his brutality alienated the very people he sought to control. Nobles trembled, generals whispered in secret, and the common folk cursed his name. His reign became a cycle of fear and suspicion, every punishment sowing more hatred than loyalty. Byzantium endured, but beneath its surface discontent smoldered. Justinian clung to power with both iron and blood, but time was no longer his ally. The empire he sought to restore was weakened by his cruelty, and enemies circled like vultures. His scarred face became a haunting reminder of both his resilience and his tyranny. In 711 CE, rebellion rose once more. This time his enemies struck harder and faster, and Justinian could not escape. The slit-nosed emperor, who had returned against all odds, now met his final downfall. He was captured and executed, his head severed, ending the reign of one of Byzantium's most brutal rulers. The story of Justinian II lived on as both a warning and a legend. A man who ruled with mutilation, was mutilated himself, yet returned from exile to seize power again. His golden nose glittered in history as a symbol of vengeance, cruelty, and the dark price of ambition.